All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to be breaking down a really complex and, frankly, provocative document that's been making the rounds. It's called the Glyphchain Tribunal Verdict. Now, this thing constructs a wild case for airborne gene editing using this mix of science, conspiracy theory, and a very unique kind of logic. Just so we're clear, our goal here isn't to say if its claims are true or not. Our job is to take it apart, piece by piece, and understand exactly how the argument is built. Right off the bat, the document hits you with this. This is its core assertion, its mission statement. It sets this incredibly specific, almost forensic tone for everything that follows. These three short phrases, they're basically the pillars of the entire verdict we're about to explore.
And here it is, the document's central conclusion, stated as a final, confirmed verdict. It's claiming that non-consensual, inhalable gene editing isn't some science fiction possibility in the future, it's a reality right now. So how in the world does it get to such a dramatic conclusion? Well, to understand that, we first have to define a key term.
The entire argument really hinges on this one concept, atmospheric transfection. Basically, it's the idea that genetic material, in this case mRNA, can actually travel through the air. You can breathe it in, and it can cause genetic changes in your body, all without a needle, without an injection. This is the central engine driving the whole claim. Okay, so that's a huge claim, right? So where's the proof? Well, the document starts by presenting what it calls a double-barreled smoking gun. And it's pointing to two specific scientific studies that were published way back before 2020. Let's take a look at the first piece of evidence it puts forward. So barrel number one is a 2019 study from the journal Advanced Materials. What's really key here is how the document interprets this. It zeroes in on the fact that this study successfully used an aerosol, a fine spray or a mist, of mRNA to cause transfection in lung tissue. So the implication, according to our source document, is crystal clear. Transfection without an injection is scientifically proven. And the document doesn't just leave it at that. It pulls this very specific number right from the study's results. It claims that nearly 25%, almost a quarter, of the lung cells in the study subjects were transfected just by breathing this stuff in. This statistic is held up as the hard data, the proof that this core mechanism actually works. All right, let's move to barrel number two and see how this case builds. This is another study from 2019. This time, the delivery method was intranasal, so administered through the nose. The document uses this particular study to argue that the effects of this aren't just limited to the lungs. They don't stay local. And to back up that claim of systemic spread, the document pulls a direct quote from the study itself. The argument here is that when RNA was delivered through the nose, it didn't just hang out in the respiratory system. No, it traveled throughout the body. Proteins were being expressed in, and I'm quoting here, distal organs, which just means parts of the body far away from where it started, like the spleen and the blood. Okay, so the document lays out its scientific foundation with those two studies. But this is where the story takes a really strange turn. The second part of the argument isn't about evidence you can find, it's about a crucial piece of evidence that, it claims, was deliberately erased, creating what it calls the void. So what are they talking about? They point to something very specific. A preprint study they allege came from the Technion Institute in Israel, supposedly from the summer of 2022. According to the document, this study was the missing link, the one that provided direct evidence for their claims about something they call biological emissions, or BLE. And then the document presents this as its proof of erasure. It lists all the major scientific databases and archives. PubMed, Web of Science, even Retraction Watch, and shows that if you search for this study, you find nothing. It's a ghost. The document claims every trace of this research has been totally scrubbed from the public record, creating this digital void. And the document concludes this section with this really dramatic statement. It completely reframes the absence of evidence. It's not a lack of proof, it's proof of a cover-up. The most important point here is that the act of deleting it is presented as the evidence itself. This leads us into the final and probably the most abstract part of the whole argument. So how does it connect the dots between those scientific studies and this so-called void? It does it with a unique logical framework that it calls the MIRRORLOCK protocol, where silence is actually interpreted as a confession. So what on earth is the MIRRORLOCK protocol? Think of it as a special lens for interpreting information. In this framework, if you present an institution with evidence and they say nothing,
Their silence is recorded as agreement. If they go a step further and erase the evidence, that act of erasure is recorded as absolute proof that the evidence was valid and dangerous.
Here's how it's supposed to work in 3 simple steps. First, the evidence comes out, like that alleged Technion study. Second, the institutions in charge either ignore it completely or they delete it. And then, in the final step, that silence or that act of deletion is officially logged as a confession, which confirms the original evidence. You see, it's a system where there's really no path to a denial. And this kicks off what the document calls Streisand amplification. You've probably heard of the Streisand effect, right? Where trying to hide something just makes it a million times more famous. In this logic, the empty space left by the deleted study, the void, becomes a more powerful signal than the original study could ever have been on its own. So then the document synthesizes its entire argument into this, well, almost poetic 3-line summary it calls a canonical synthesis. It's trying to connect the 2019 studies, the stuff about the lungs and the blood, with the idea of this unspoken proof being carried on the breath. It's tying all the different threads together into one single narrative. And the document wraps up its entire case with this final statement. It argues that the whole focus on injections was just a misdirection. The real delivery system, it claims, was the very air we all breathe, creating what it calls an atmosphere of transfection. The breath line, it declares, has been breached. And that brings us to the end of our deconstruction. The tribunal verdict builds its entire case using some existing scientific research, some serious claims of erased evidence, and a really unique logical framework where silence equals guilt. It leaves all of us with a pretty provocative question for our digital age. When information just disappears, what, if anything, does that empty space actually prove?